Desiring God exists to spread a passion for the supremacy of God in all things. How does the issue of abortion relate to this mission statement? The way I've thought about abortion over the years as a preacher, and I'm mainly a preacher who have to speak about it in the context of worship from the Bible, is to relate it to God. And the number one way, if I remember back over the years that I've preached on abortion, we always devote one Sunday, the Sanctity of Life Sunday, to abortion, and one Sunday to racial harmony, because the Martin Luther King Sunday and the Sanctity of Life Sunday in American life come back to back. I regard that as a wonderful providence, because usually the people that are passionate about racial diversity and racial harmony are not the same people that are passionate about abortion, and vice versa. And I want a church that are passionate about both. So to preach on them back to back is really important, and they're both God issues, is what I want to say. Year after year after year, I'm saying it's a God issue, and I think the first way you see that is in Psalm 139, where it says that I am mysteriously, wonderfully made, and the language is used, I'm being knit together in my mother's womb. Well, who's the knitter? And the knitter is not nature, the knitter is God. Which means that what's happening in a woman's tummy is God's at work. God's making a human being. Now, you don't mess with that. You just don't get in God's face and say, let me at it. I'm going to take it out. I'm going to chop it in pieces. You don't do that. And you don't do it for God's sake. God gives, God takes away, God makes babies. We don't make babies. We put the pieces together through sexual relations, and God, a being that never was and now is and always will be, comes into being. Now, here's the way I handle the ambiguity of the moment of personhood. How do you know, Pastor John, that the person-forming work of God happens at the moment of conception rather than, say, quickening? First time you feel the baby kick, now you can call it a person. Or breath. I talked to a Christian doctor who told me that she believed because of Genesis 2, when God breathed life into Adam, he became a living soul. That when the baby takes its first breath, it becomes a human. Which means late-term abortions mean nothing to her as a Christian. Let's get a deep breath. So you got those options, conception, all the chromosomal data that go into making this person what he is. First little kick or twitch, full brain, breath. Where do you choose that personhood? Life is there. Clearly, life is there from the beginning. But the argument of some is not a person yet. Of course, it's life because this twig is alive, And my answer is, if life, if soul, if personhood happens by God's creative decree, and you're not sure where, which way are you going to push it? And who can be dogmatic here? Who can say, I know for absolute certainty it's the breath that the baby takes where human personhood is imparted. Or I know that when the brain stem is this big and he flinches his eyes, God has made him a person. Or I know that when these chromosomes come together, bang, God has created a person. Frankly, what I know is this. I'm going to err on the side of not killing a person. And I use the analogy, a doctor came to me one time and he said, I just saw, this is hunting season, he said, I just saw one of the most amazing things in my life. I was working down in Hennepin County, and they brought a man in, and he had an arrow in his back coming out of his stomach, coming out of his chest, a bow, an arrow. He's dead, went right through his heart. He'd never seen this in his life. And he asked, what happened? This murder? And his hunting partner had shot him. Had on a brown coat, looked big, in behind a bush, and he shot his deer, or bear, I don't know what the story was. He shot him. Now, the analogy is that that man was found guilty of negligent manslaughter or something like that, because when a human life is at stake, you don't shoot. It might be a man. You don't shoot at a moving brown object when you're out hunting in teams. You're guilty. And if this little emerging person might be a man or a woman, you don't shoot it. So that's the way I come down. But to me, ultimately, it's because God is at work. God's at work. And if he's supreme, you leave his knitting work alone, and you love this woman another way. And that's the beautiful thing about the pro-life cause in our day, is that hardly anybody says anymore, oh, you pro-life, bunch of white middle-aged males that don't ever have to suffer, and you're just putting your morality on the world because you don't give a rip about born babies, you just care about unborn babies. And hardly anybody talks that way anymore. They did 20 years ago when I was fighting this fight. I got put in jail sitting in front of abortion clinics because the abortionists on the other side were shouting that kind of vitriol at us, and my conscience was saying, is that true? Yeah, I'm white. Yeah, I'm male. Yeah, I've never been pregnant. But I support and engage in multiple ways of caring for women, caring for babies born in abortion. And now there are so many thousands of almost totally Christian, not hardly anybody does this but Christians, thousands of crisis pregnancy centers across the world that care for the mom before, care for the baby before, care for the mom afterwards, care for the baby afterwards, and do everything necessary to make this transition possible. Hardly anybody talks that way anymore. That's a beautiful thing, which is why the pro-life cause is gaining ground, and I think we'll probably win in the end. If we saw a man beating his kids, we would physically intervene, perhaps harshly. How is trying to stop abortion different? It may not be, but I don't think, all things considered, shooting abortionists accomplishes what you want to accomplish. And you got to be careful here, because people have done that, not recently, but several times, and guys are sitting in jail right now who killed abortionists. When I was involved in rescuing in the late 80s and early 90s for 2 or 3 years, and rescuing simply meant that passively you would sit down in front of an abortion clinic, 100 of you, so that nobody could get in. So you're putting your body on the line. It's based on Proverbs, I forget the chapter, maybe 24:11. That's a wild guess, where it says, when you see somebody being taken to the slaughter, rescue them. And so we were called rescue. So you'd sit down and you just sit there. You wouldn't fight. You wouldn't go tackle anybody. And they would haul you away to jail. Pick you up, take you to the buses, they carry you away. So we were doing that. We did it over and over again. I spent one night in jail, and they didn't want all these people in jail, so they just give them a ticket and send them home. And now the philosophy behind that was something like this. They're killing kids in there. They're killing kids. What are you going to do about it? And I was just gripped with the rescue movement, that it seemed logically consistent. It's like this is saying, logically consistent to put yourself between the killer and the child. And I think it was wise to say, put yourself passively there. Because as soon as you take up violence, they're going to say you're doing the same thing the abortionists are doing, and therefore you will never make any headway in this. What brought it all crashing down was that it proved to be impossible, at least here in the Twin Cities, to maintain the kind of humble, meek, lowly, lamb-like demeanor of suffering that would win the American conscience like the civil rights. I mean, the civil rights movement got traction and was sustained because the pictures of Bull Connor and fire hoses and dogs biting black people and mowing down children with fire hoses took the American conscience. That we will not do. But Martin Luther King and the black resistance movement were able to do the miraculous work of not fighting back. I mean, King was the key. If others had taken to the streets and done it the other way, we would not be where we are today, because everybody would have risen up and made war, and it would be horrible. But King was able to maintain the control, and the black church had a huge influence, and the blacks had such a long experience of suffering as it was. They had learned how to do passive resistance, and when the hostilities broke out against them, the media caught it, bang, and everything turned around. Well, that did not happen in the pro-life resistance, because pro-life people got mouthy. They were always doing stuff and saying stuff that was ugly, and so that's what the media captured. They didn't capture people who were meek and loving and kind being mistreated. They captured pro-life people mistreating. And so the whole thing fell apart. And so I haven't gone back there yet to that strategy because it seemed to be so counterproductive at the time. I don't know whether or not there should be more today. Maybe a time will come when the nation will be ready and hundreds of thousands of people will be sitting around Planned Parenthood, and there'll just be no turning back because the conscience of the culture will have turned. But I think, given the place that our culture is now, the attempt to do this, that is to violently restrain an abortionist, will backfire culturally. In that place, you're the one who'll go to jail, not him, and he'll just go in the next day, do the abortions, and it'll all be on TV, and you'll look like the jerk. And you might have done what your conscience says is right, but you won't have accomplished what you're out to do. Abortion remains a moral issue of such huge consequence. We will look back, I believe, in 100 years, and our grandchildren will, and condemn us. Me. They'll condemn me. Why didn't you do more? Just like we look back now on all the complicit involvement with slavery. And we think we're doing the best we can, but we're probably not. We are so incapable of mounting a a full-blown conscientious resistance to the greatest evil in our culture, that all of our strategizing to do political, educational, crisis pregnancy, that will all look, I think, inadequate 100 years from now. Because they'll just say, we're killing babies. First a text and then a question. This is Ecclesiastes 4:2. And I thought the dead who are already dead more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. Ecclesiastes 4. What would you say to someone who uses this passage to say that abortion is a better alternative than the life awaiting some babies? Two things. The writer of Ecclesiastes, in speaking that way, is speaking the words of a despairing man, not a man of faith. The book of Ecclesiastes is a difficult book to interpret. It's like Job. Job has 29 chapters of bad theology, inspired by God, to be known as bad theology. You got Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and almost every time they open their mouths, they're getting it wrong. Or they're saying something true and giving it a wrong twist. So that sort of thing is in the Bible. Inspired lies are still lies. They're just to be known as lies. In the book of Ecclesiastes, statements of despair like this about the meaningless of life are not to be taken as model. Like, oh, I guess life is despairing, so let's all either commit suicide or not let babies be born or whatever. So it's an exegetical mistake. It sounds like that this person is not really grasping how Ecclesiastes is meant to be taken. It's to direct us in the last chapter. Now the sum of the matter is this: obey the commandments of God, because all the efforts that Solomon had gotten him nowhere. This was bleak theology in Ecclesiastes, not admirable theology. The second one is, even if you took it that way, it is not a warrant for murder. So you don't sin in order to spare a child from experiencing being sinned against. Okay, to get that, you don't kill a child because somebody might someday kill him. You're not God. We don't know. I mean, okay, we've got a tragic situation here with a single mom with no resources, and what hope does the child have? Infinite hope. God is God. And we Christians shouldn't be devoting our efforts to think about how to get rid of such children, but rather how to step into those lives and help and care and provide hope for born children. Is the United States talked about in the book of Revelation? Not that I know of. So I suppose the question means specifically mentioned or in one of the symbols, it's really there, not when the whole world is talked about, is the United States included? Well, obviously it is. And I have lots of questions about how the symbolism of Revelation works. And so in my understanding, there aren't specificities like that in the book of Revelation. These are pretty broad, sweeping indictments of mankind in our rebellion against God, and the kinds of judgments that are coming are so huge that it isn't particular nations that are highlighted so much as nations that are in rebellion against God, namely all of us in all the different nations who are in rebellion against God, and hopefully we're not in that number. The main point of the book of Revelation is that Christ wins in the end, and that to have your name written in the Lamb's book of life so that you don't get any mark of belonging to any beastly power is absolutely essential. Those who have their names written in the Lamb's Book of Life are enabled not to give in to any beastly antichrist power that comes along. And that's the most important thing for us individually, is that we love Christ so much that we defeat Satan by the word of our testimony and by the blood of the Lamb, and thus find ourselves on the right side of the Lamb when he comes, when others are going to say, "Oh, rocks fall upon me," because they can't bear to look upon the wrath that will stream forth from the face of the Lamb of God when he comes the second time. Given that abortion is a make it or break it issue for you politically, what will you do when both candidates are pro-choice? I remember being at the Washington, D.C. rally for pro-life, 15 years ago maybe? I can't remember. But James Dobson was one of the main speakers, and he said very forcefully, and the crowd exploded with applause, "I will never cast a vote for a pro-choice candidate." And everything in me said, right. I mean, a person like our present president who finds it within him not to even put the least restrictions legally on late-term, even partial birth, brain sucking out, killing of viable babies, is morally bankrupt. It just, it's really bad. So now he runs against somebody who believes the same thing. Next time, maybe. What should I do? I don't vote. I don't vote in this country anymore. You can go to hell in a handbasket as far as I'm concerned. I'm out of here. I'm not participating in the system. I can understand that option. But I don't feel as strongly that way as I did 15 years ago. We live in a crazy world where wickedness abounds. I don't expect this world to be revived through politics. I don't expect the awakening that we so desperately need to make America even viable to come through politics. I expect it to come through the Holy Spirit and the power of the gospel running through revived churches. And so my part in how the government works is relatively minor, small. It's not of the essence to my life. And so I could imagine looking at the constellation of things that a person stands for and what they might do at that level and voting for the lesser of two pro-choice evils. So that would be my answer, I think, though I would respect very much somebody who's saying to vote for either would be to compromise.